It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
As I was saying before the break, this has been a difficult week for our state especially for the Republican Party on the front of the bribery schemes. We had State Senator Jeremy Hutchinson indicted, and then we started the sentencing this week of other legislators who were already indicted and found guilty, convicted. We started the sentencing phase of those. Today, we've got Randall G. Shelton Jr., because last night, we're going to talk about him today, because last night he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Now, he was supposedly an accomplice in a kickback scheme involving state grants. Josh Waters with Conduit is with us. Josh was there for that sentencing, as it's been for throughout the sentencing phases and the trials. Josh, tell us a little bit about what kind of sentence he got and what's next.
Hey, Jen. Morning. Yes, Randall Shelton did get 6 years and 72 months in federal prison. After that, he'll be on 3 years supervised release. He's ordered to pay restitution of over $660,000, and he will have assets seized over at $664,000. And so he is allowed to self-report to prison, and he has to self-report by Monday, October 8th. And just a little caveat on that, there is some ways he could possibly avoid that, but I think at this point, those possibilities are a little lower, because Mr. Shelton did yesterday issue a statement. We did not hear that from former Senator John Woods on Wednesday, but Randall Shelton did issue a very passionate statement to the judge right before the sentence came down. He said he was full of sorrow and pain. He apologized for hurting the people of Arkansas, for hurting Ecclesia College, and for hurting his family, and he pleaded for mercy because for the sake of his family and his newborn baby. But ultimately,
Wow.
The judge said he thought he felt remorseful, but that he wasn't truly accepting the actions of his conduct, and that he had to send a message to other middlemen like him who might be thinking about doing the same thing he did and stealing money from the taxpayers.
So the whole tone of the courtroom with that kind of plea, with an impassioned plea like that for mercy, must have felt entirely different than the atmosphere where John Woods, former Senator John Woods, really, he didn't say anything. And basically what you told us was there was hardly any reaction from him when his sentence came down, which, if the viewers are not aware of that, or the listeners, he was about 18 years in prison and close to or over $2 million in fines.
Yes, that's right. It was a very, very different tone in the courtroom yesterday. Mr. Shelton, and really throughout the case, had really had a different demeanor, and the judge recognized that, and he recognized the fact that Shelton did show remorse. He cried really throughout. His parents were there. His wife was there, and they were visibly upset. His mother spoke on his behalf towards the end, and she was very upset. And that was kind of a sadder moment, that this family had been ruined. And U.S. Attorney Dak Keys mentioned that, Randall Shelton has kind of, ruined part of his family because of his actions. But U.S. Attorney Dak Keys also mentioned that with the scheme that they had cooked up and implemented, that they had considered the consequences, they considered how it would affect his family, and ignored those consequences to steal more and more money from the taxpayers.
Right. So, what do you expect to happen next? Tell us what's coming down the pike. First of all, there are going to be more sentencing hearings, but also the U.S. Attorney yesterday said, and I don't think anyone missed this, that much more is coming. This investigation is far from over.
Yes. So next week there will be two more sentencings in this specific case around the kickbacks through Ecclesia College. That'll be former State Representative Micah Neal, who ended up taking a plea deal and worked with the government and actually testified in this case against John Wood and Randall Shelton. So he will have his sentencing next week, as will Orrin Paris, the former president of Ecclesia College, who was involved in this. He also took a plea deal. He did not testify at trial, but are saying he did cooperate with the government and help them in their case against Woods and Shelton. And they didn't have like a little press gaggle like they had after John Woods yesterday, but I did ask the
Right.
U.S. Attorney that if it was safe to assume, all these other legislators that have been, named as sponsoring GIF grants to Ecclesia or the Arkansas Health and Economic Research, their names have kind of been lumped in with this. It says it's safe to assume that they're not going to be charged in any of this. And he said that was a really good question, but he couldn't really comment or say anything on that yet, but that he hopes to be able to say something about that sooner than later. And so I think that really puts a question mark still on where are we. We know there's other investigations going on. So who's going to be, the next name to drop or be indicted or enter a plea deal? So it's not over by any means. The corruption in Arkansas and the justice.
Right. Is there any indication, Josh, that any of these guys are going to turn and start helping the state more because of the sentences that they've received?
That's a really good question, because the judge did push back a little yesterday whenever he was delivering his sentence, how, Randall Shelton kind of came down before him and was asking for mercy and apologized for his actions and saying it was his actions alone to give John Woods money. And he pushed back saying, he thought that was a little unfortunate because for over 18 months, I think at one point he said he hurled everything at the wall, meaning his attorneys tried to make every argument possible to get out of this. He made him put on a full month-long trial, go through this entire process, and at the very end, almost seemed to, admit his guilt without admitting it, of course, for appeal purposes. But so I thought that was interesting. But, I think these sentences, Jan, really do send the messages to any other middlemen who are involved and any other former legislators that are involved is, if you don't cooperate and go all the way through and fight this, when we, have all the information on you. And the judge talked about that, how there's a mountain of evidence and how it was laid out so succinctly and almost in a second-by-second and minute-by-minute fashion showing the crimes that they committed. And so I think a clear message has been sent to other people who might be involved or not cooperating that they need to cooperate to avoid these large sentences that have been handed out.
Okay, for the folks who are not familiar with the bribery schemes involving Ecclesia College, tell us what's going to be happening next week. What are the guys who are accused next week? I know we're talking about was it Orrin Paris, I believe. Tell us who you're going to be covering next week.
So Orrin Paris was the former president of Ecclesia College, and for those who might not be familiar with the bribery scheme at all, what Senator John Woods did was found a way to send GIF grants, which is taxpayer money, to Ecclesia College. Ecclesia College then, through sham consulting agreements, paid Randall Shelton portions of the money they got, and then Randall Shelton then passed along that money to Senator John Woods. Micah Neal, a former state representative, also did, not to the same extent Woods did, but also supported grants and got kickbacks through Shelton and Woods. And so Micah Neal will be sentenced next week for his role, and then Orrin Paris will be sentenced for his role as he was the president. He was the one overseeing, everything from the Ecclesia end. So I do anticipate them to get lighter sentences because they entered plea deals and because they cooperated with the government. But that's who the players are that'll be sentenced next week.
And hasn't the gift fund, the fund that has been at the center of all the bribery schemes, hasn't that been declared by the state Supreme Court unconstitutional? The whole concept of that fund?
Yes, it's been declared unconstitutional twice. And one of the comments that stuck out to me on that yesterday from Judge Brooks was that John Woods worked very hard to get around what I thought was pretty clear Supreme Court precedent saying you can't do GIF money like this. You can't just, basically have this as a slush fund for legislators to dole out for, kind of as a re-election slush fund, so to speak. And so it had already been ruled unconstitutional, and he set up a procedure to try to get around that. And in a sense, he did all this. It has since, been ruled unconstitutional again, and it is not being operated like it was when all this money was flowing out.
Well, doesn't the governor have a fund that's similar to this with the same kind of just general lack of oversight that he can just give to businesses that he chooses? Isn't there a similar fund? And if so, shouldn't, if the state Supreme Court says that it's unconstitutional for legislators to dole out this kind of money without any real legislative oversight, shouldn't the same be said for the governor's discretionary fund? Or is that different?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jan. I think you're probably talking about the Quick Action Closing Fund, which is basically just a corporate welfare slush fund. So in Arkansas, to spend the taxpayers' money, you're supposed to get 3/4 vote, majority vote from the House and Senate. And basically they set up that fund and some other funds to kind of get around that requirement. And so I think that's something that should be watched. But you're exactly right. It's basically another form of a slush fund.
Well, I'm watching it. I've been watching it, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your insight and your very thorough coverage of the bribery scheme trials and the hearings and sentencing. So thank you so much. We're going to be back, folks, with much more Conduit news after this.